My father left the family house to my younger brother and left me a single sealed envelope, and everyone in that lawyer's office looked at me with the kind of pity reserved for people who've clearly been forgotten. My name is Renata. I'm 38, and for most of my life, I was the daughter who showed up, the one who canceled vacations to sit in hospital rooms, while my brother Daniel built a career 3 states away and visited twice a year with expensive gifts that never quite made up for his absence. If stories like this hit close to home for you, stick around and consider liking and subscribing. There are more stories like this one coming. My father, Walter, was a proud, difficult man who ran a small hardware store for 30 years and never once said the words, "I love you," in any way I could clearly recognize as such. He showed love through fixing things, through showing up at 6 a.m. to help you move furniture, through 1,000 small, quiet gestures I spent years not fully appreciating until it was almost too late to appreciate them at all. When he got sick 3 years ago, congestive heart failure that slowly stole his independence one hospital visit at a time, I was the one who rearranged my entire life around his care. I quit my job to become his primary caregiver, moved back into my childhood bedroom at 35 years old, managed his medications, drove him to appointments, sat with him through nights so difficult I still can't fully describe them to people who weren't there. Daniel called every few weeks. He sent money sometimes, which I appreciated genuinely, but money doesn't sit beside someone at 3 a.m. when they're struggling to breathe and terrified they might not see morning. Money doesn't hold someone's hand through the particular loneliness of watching a proud man slowly lose control over his own body. I didn't do any of it expecting recognition. I did it because he was my father, and because some part of me believed, foolishly perhaps, that showing up consistently for someone eventually means something, eventually gets seen for what it actually is. He died 8 months ago on a quiet Tuesday morning with me holding his hand exactly like I had through so many difficult mornings before that one. I thought, in the immediate aftermath of losing him, that grief would be the hardest part of everything that followed. I was wrong about that too. The will reading happened 3 weeks after the funeral in a small law office downtown, Daniel flying in the night before, dressed in an expensive suit that made the distance between our lives feel even more pronounced than usual. The lawyer, an older man named Mr. Halloway, who'd apparently known my father for decades, read through the will with the kind of careful formality that made everything feel unbearably clinical. The house went to Daniel, all of it, completely, no conditions attached. The savings account, modest but not insignificant after 30 years of careful hardware store profits, also went entirely to Daniel. I received a single envelope, sealed with my name written on the front in my father's increasingly shaky handwriting from those final months. I remember sitting in that office, humiliation burning through me in a way I'd never quite experienced before, aware of Mr. Halloway's careful, pitying expression, aware of Daniel shifting uncomfortably in his seat beside me, clearly as surprised by the imbalance as I was. "That can't be right," I said, my voice barely steady. "I took care of him for 3 years. I gave up my job. I gave up my entire life for 3 years, and he left me an envelope?" Daniel, to his credit, looked genuinely stricken. "Renata, I didn't know about any of this. I swear, Dad never told me he was planning this." I didn't believe him at first. I sat there, convinced this was some final, cruel confirmation that no matter what I sacrificed, no matter how consistently I showed up, I would always be the daughter who mattered less in the ways that apparently counted most. I left that office without opening the envelope, too angry and humiliated to read whatever explanation my father had apparently decided I deserved instead of an actual inheritance. I didn't open it for almost 3 weeks. I finally opened it alone one night, sitting on the floor of my childhood bedroom, the same room I'd been living in for 3 years, while caring for a man who apparently valued my brother's absence more than my presence. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the letter inside, bracing myself for something that might make an already unbearable situation feel even worse. My dearest Renata, it began, in handwriting that grew steadier as the letter progressed, like he'd written it during one of his better days. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I imagine, knowing you, that you're currently furious with me, possibly the angriest you've ever been in your entire life. I need you to keep reading anyway, because what I'm about to explain will make sense of everything, even if it doesn't make the anger disappear right away. I kept reading, tears already gathering, uncertain what I was about to learn. I didn't leave your brother the house and the savings because I valued him more than you. I left him those things because he needs them in ways you don't, and because I knew with complete certainty that you would understand this decision better than anyone else once you knew the full truth. Daniel has been struggling financially for the past 4 years, Renata, struggling in ways his expensive suits and occasional gifts were specifically designed to hide from both of us. He lost significant money in a business venture that failed, took on debt he still hasn't told anyone about, including you. He visits infrequently, not because he doesn't love me, but because facing the life he built that looks successful from the outside and isn't, has become something he doesn't know how to do honestly. I sat frozen on that floor, completely reevaluating years of resentment I'd built against my brother, years of assuming his absence meant indifference rather than something far more complicated and painful. The letter continued. I gave him the house and the savings because he needs a foundation to rebuild from, something stable to stand on while he works through the mess he's created for himself. You don't need that same foundation, Renata, because you've spent your entire life building something far more valuable than money or property. You've built the kind of character that shows up, that sacrifices without keeping score, that sits beside people during their hardest moments without needing recognition for doing so. That's not something I could put in a will even if I wanted to, because you already own it completely, more securely than any house or savings account could ever provide. By this point, I was crying too hard to continue reading for several minutes, overwhelmed by a letter that had completely rearranged my understanding of my father's final decision. What I left you instead, the letter continued, is something I hope means more than money ever could. Enclosed with this letter, you'll find the deed to the small cabin at Miller's Lake, the one your mother and I bought when you were 7 years old, the one where you spent every summer of your childhood learning to fish, learning to be patient, learning to love quiet mornings the way I always loved watching you experience them. That property isn't in the main estate because I transferred ownership to you privately 3 years ago, the week you moved back home to care for me, though I never told you at the time because I wanted it to remain something entirely yours, separate from anything that might later feel complicated by inheritance or comparison. It's already yours, Renata. It has been for 3 years. I just wanted you to discover that on your own terms, in your own time, once the anger from today has had space to settle. I sat on that floor for nearly an hour after finishing the letter, grief and relief and shame all tangled together in a way I couldn't fully separate. Shame, because I'd spent 3 weeks assuming the worst about a father who'd spent his final years quietly ensuring I'd have something meaningful entirely my own, completely protected from any future family complications. Shame, because I'd let 3 weeks of silence build resentment toward a brother who was apparently drowning in struggles I knew absolutely nothing about. I called Daniel that same night. I expected the conversation to be difficult. Instead, he answered, and within minutes, he was crying on the phone in a way I'd genuinely never heard from him before, finally admitting everything Dad's letter had already told me, relief clearly flooding through him at no longer having to carry that secret entirely alone. I didn't want you to know how badly I'd messed everything up, he admitted. You were already carrying so much, taking care of Dad, and I felt like the least I could do was not add my own failures onto everything you were already dealing with. We talked for almost 3 hours that night, longer than we'd genuinely talked in years, finally being honest with each other in ways our family had never quite managed while Dad was still alive to mediate between us. Daniel used part of the inheritance to pay off his debts, started rebuilding slowly, and for the first time in years, started calling not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to talk. I kept the cabin at Miller's Lake. I visit most weekends now, usually alone, sometimes with Daniel when he can get away from his rebuilding life 3 states over. I fish exactly the way my father taught me, patiently, quietly, understanding now that patience was always the thing he valued most, the thing he apparently saw in me long before I recognized it clearly enough in myself. I still think about that humiliating afternoon in the lawyer's office sometimes, the assumption I made in that first devastating hour that I'd been forgotten, undervalued, overlooked in favor of a brother who seemed from the outside to have simply done less. I understand now that inheritance isn't always about equal division. Sometimes it's about a parent seeing exactly what each child actually needs and trusting that the child who needs it least will eventually understand why, once given enough time and enough truth to see the full picture clearly.